So you've probably seen the mind-blowing AI demos online by now, right? I mean, like an autonomous agent that can just, I don't know, negotiate a supply contract completely on its own.
Right, or execute complex stock trades, or even write and merge production code. It really looks like the future is already here.
Yeah, exactly. But then, you go into work and that same agent never actually makes it into your company's production environment. It sits trapped in a lab somewhere.
Yep, it's the classic pilot purgatory.
Right. And if you've ever wondered why all this trillion-dollar frontier model value is just bottlenecked, well, it's not because the AI isn't smart enough. It's because nobody can insure it.
The liability is simply too massive. I mean, if an autonomous agent makes a catastrophic error in the real world, a company needs an insurance underwriter to cover that loss.
Which they can't get.
Exactly. Right now, underwriters look at these black box AI systems and essentially say, we have no mathematical way to quantify your risk, so we just won't cover you.
Which is why today's deep dive is so fascinating. We are unpacking this massive, highly technical stack of documents from a company called ThetaDriven.
Specifically, a project they call Theta Cog.
Right, Theta Cog. And we've got their deep tech engineering specs, this really cool wild ideas matrix, and a comprehensive go-to-market strategy penned by Elias Musman.
It's a dense read, but incredibly important.
Oh, totally. And our mission today is to explore their radical proposal to solve this exact insurance bottleneck. And spoiler alert for you listening, they aren't offering another software patch.
No, not at all. They are proposing a physical, hardware-level insurability receipt, which is wild.
It really is. Okay, so to understand why a hardware receipt is even necessary, let's unpack how companies are currently trying to make AI safe.
Well, today they rely heavily on software guardrails. They build intent classifiers or, secondary monitoring models to just watch the primary AI and block any sensitive actions.
Which makes you feel safe, right? Like,
Uh,
oh, we have a monitor.
Right. It creates a feeling of safety for the buyer. But legally and actuarially, feeling safe is completely meaningless.
Yeah, the insurance adjuster doesn't care about your feelings.
Exactly. When a multi-million-dollar loss event actually happens, a claims adjuster gets involved. And a probabilistic confidence score generated by a piece of software doesn't hold up as forensic evidence.
Because of a fundamental math problem, right?
Okay.
From 1953, the documents bring up Rice's theorem.
Yes, Rice's theorem. It perfectly explains why software guardrails fail the ultimate test.
Right, because essentially it proves that a software monitor shares the exact same failure domain as the software it is designed to watch.
The vulnerability is entirely recursive. If the underlying operating system or the AI model drifts into a failure state, the software monitor is susceptible to that exact same breakdown.
I like to compare it to a student grading their own homework. I mean, if the student genuinely misunderstands the material, they aren't going to realize they got the answers wrong when they check their own test.
They'll just mathematically confirm their own errors. You are relying on the very medium that is failing to report its own failure.
Wow. And the regulatory environment is about to make this like a board-level crisis, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The EU AI Act's Article 14 goes into effect on August 2, 2026.
That's right around the corner.
It is. And that article demands strict human oversight of AI systems. Crucially, it stipulates that software layer monitoring alone, legally, cannot satisfy that requirement.
So if you deploy a high-risk AI after that date using just, software guardrails, you are completely naked to liability.
Completely naked. And the fines are staggering. We're talking up to 3% of global turnover.
Which is astronomical for a large enterprise.
Right. So companies are facing a really stark choice. They can either pay massive premiums to an ever-shrinking panel of carriers willing to take a blind risk, pay the regulatory fines, or simply abandon their AI deployment altogether.
Which brings us back to Theta Cog and their solution. They call it the Attested Insurability Receipt, or AR.
The AR.
And the sources use this brilliant analogy that really clarified the concept for me. Think back to the Progressive Insurance OBD2 Dongle from 1996.
Oh, the snapshot thing.
Exactly. Before that little device, auto insurance was just based on demographics, your age, your zip code.
Wait, broad statistics.
But Progressive gave you a physical dongle to plug directly into your car's diagnostic port. It physically proved you weren't slamming on the brakes or driving erratically. If you stayed in your lane, your rates dropped.
And Theta Cog is essentially building that exact OBD2 dongle, but for autonomous agents.
Which is just such a cool concept.
It is. They are taking AI risk, which has historically been this unquantifiable, spooky mystery, and turning it into a mathematically priced metric. They call it trust debt.
Trust debt, right.
Yeah.
And they measure it in basis points like a financial instrument.
Exactly. If the AI agent stays in its defined behavioral lane, the hardware emits this attested insurability receipt.
So suddenly the claims adjuster has cryptographic physical proof of non-negligence. Not a software guess, but physical proof. But, okay, here's where my mind started to bend a bit, and I actually pushed back hard while reading the specs. Because with a car, staying in your lane is a literal physical reality, right? The wheels are either between the painted lines on the asphalt or they aren't.
Sure, it's macroscopic physics.
But an AI doesn't have wheels. It's just electric charges on a microchip. So how does a literal piece of silicon know if an AI is acting like a helpful customer service rep versus, a rogue stock trader?
Well, to answer that, we really have to drop down to the bare metal. We have to look at how silicon actually measures meaning.
Okay, let's get into the weeds.
Theta Cog's system relies on a lightweight Rust daemon. They call it a local PMU, a performance monitoring unit.
And this runs directly on the CPU.
Right on the cloud server CPU, right alongside the orchestrator that's running the AI agent. But the crucial distinction here is that this PMU isn't trying to read the English text of the AI's prompt or its output.
Right, it doesn't understand English.
Exactly. It is measuring a physical phenomenon the documents call auto-coincident role continuity.
Okay, auto-coincident role continuity. That is a very heavy academic phrase. Let's unpack that for the listener.
Let's do it.
From what I gather, it means that when an AI inhabits a specific semantic role, let's say it's acting as a medical intake assistant, it creates a highly specific, repeatable path of cache misses inside the CPU.
Yes, the behavior and the physical footprint coincide. That's the auto-coincident part.
So the physics behind it are actually measuring meaning.
They are remarkably elegant. Every semantic action an AI takes has a physical coordinate written into the hardware's address fetch path. The hardware tracks what the sources call a 144-cell behavioral lattice.
And when the AI is operating within its expected parameters, the cache miss signature looks a very certain way.
Precisely.
And the documents introduce this term, the FIFIME, or the fractal identity map. So this FAME is basically a map of all those permitted physical pathways.
Right. So if meaning becomes a literal physical location in the hardware, then verifying the AI's behavior isn't some separate software check.
The verification is the physical act of fetching the data itself.
Exactly. The hardware is the auditor. The Theta Cog uses a logic gate called SimHash XOR to check these L1D cache misses at sub-nanosecond speeds.
We're talking picoseconds here.
Yes. This happens in AC0, which is a specific class of combinational logic that resolves in a single clock cycle.
And why is that one clock cycle thing so important?
Because it happens in one clock cycle, it literally cannot be interrupted, and it cannot rewrite itself. It is mathematically incapable of lying.
Wow. So it completely bypasses the software failure domain we talked about earlier with Rice's theorem.
Completely bypasses it.
So if the AI breaks character, say our medical assistant suddenly starts trying to execute SQL injection attacks on the hospital database, the physical cache routing shifts instantly because it's accessing different parts of the memory.
And the hardware catches that drift right off the fractal identity map. The auditor is no longer the software model evaluating itself.
It is the physical silicon substrate that the software is forced to run on. That is incredible.
It's a paradigm shift.
But the engineering team ran into a massive roadblock depending on the operating system, which I thought was such a fascinating real-world constraint.
Oh, the Linux versus Mac issue.
Yeah. If you're running this on a Linux server, grabbing that hardware data is actually pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah. Very straightforward. The daemon just uses a standard system called perf-even-topen, and it reads those native performance counters in about 50 nanoseconds.
Super fast. But if you try to do this on a Mac, on Apple Silicon, you hit an absolute brick wall.
You do. Because Apple hides those raw hardware counters behind a private, privileged API called kperf.
And you can't just ask Apple nicely to use it.
No, you cannot access them without breaking App Store rules or relying on undocumented frameworks that Apple could just break with any minor software update.
And for a system that promises, enterprise-grade insurability, you obviously can't build your foundation on an unstable hack.
Exactly. Which forces them into this brilliant workaround.
Yes, tell us about the pointer chase.
Since they are locked out of reading the raw counters on a Mac, they infer the cache misses by measuring what they call unprivileged pointer chase latency curves.
I love this part. It reminded me of a simple analogy. It's like saying, you won't let me look the speedometer on the dashboard, so I'm just going to calculate my exact speed by timing how long it takes for the trees to pass by my window.
That is exactly what they're doing. The mechanics of that pointer chase are fascinating. A pointer chase forces the CPU into a dependent load latency.
Meaning each value the CPU loads from memory is the literal address for the next load.
Right. And because of that strict dependency, the CPU's internal prefetcher, which usually tries to guess what data is needed next to speed things up, is completely neutralized.
It can't hide the delay.
No, it can't. A cache miss to the main DRAM takes roughly 75 times longer than hitting the local L1 cache. So by measuring those latency curves, Theta Cog maps the entire cache hierarchy.
And infers the drift right off the silicon, all without needing that privileged kperf interface. That is just, it's incredible engineering.
It's a very elegant solution to a very hard physical constraint.
So, okay, we've established that the hardware can physically detect when the AI goes off the rails. But reading this, I kept coming back to the biggest question. Why are these AIs drifting in the first place?
The hallucination problem.
Right. Every single week, we hear tech lab CEOs promising that their next model will finally, patch out hallucinations. But these sources argue that those CEOs are basically ignoring the laws of physics.
They are. The tech industry generally frames hallucinations as an engineering bug-like, a mistake in the code that could be squashed with enough alignment training or RLHF.
But the documents reject that.
They completely reject that framework. They reframe these drifts as polymorphs, pulling a concept directly from chemistry.
And this leads to the ritonavir story, which absolutely blew my mind. Have you ever heard this?
It's a legendary case study in chemistry, yeah.
So back in 1998, there was this HIV drug called ritonavir, and it was being manufactured perfectly in a factory in Chicago. Patients were taking it. It was saving lives. Everything was great.
A total success story. Until it wasn't.
Right. Suddenly, out of nowhere, it just stopped working. The drug physically stopped dissolving in patients' bodies.
The chemists panicked, naturally.
Of course. They checked the recipe, the temperature, the ingredients, but atom for atom, it was the exact same molecule. It hadn't changed chemically.
But physically, the molecule had inexplicably formed a different crystal lattice. It had morphed into a new polymorphic form, which they called Form 2.
The physical structure changed without the chemical composition changing.
Exactly.
And it gets so much crazier. To fix it, they decided to build a brand new, pristine factory in Italy. They staffed it with people who had never even seen the bad Form 2 lattice.
A completely sterile start.
Yeah. And they ran their tests, and the new batch failed immediately.
It was already Form 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it turned out that the Chicago team had visited the Italian factory during setup, and they literally brought the new polymorphic form with them.
Just a microscopic seed of it.
Just on their clothes or in the air. It was enough. The new crystal structure seeded itself into the vats. Same exact atoms, completely different physical behavior.
And in chemistry, this phenomenon is governed by Macron's law. It states that the number of polymorphic forms found for any given compound is strictly proportional to the time and energy spent looking for them.
So the longer it exists?
Right, the longer a molecule exists and interacts with its environment, the more likely it is to fall into a new, lower-energy polymorphic state.
Yeah.
And the authors of these documents apply Macron's law directly to computation and AI.
So wait, I really want to challenge this, because if this is true, the implications are terrifying. I mean, OpenAI, Anthropic, they have thousands of engineers working on alignment. Are these documents saying it is physically impossible to patch out hallucinations?
The physics of computation suggest exactly that.
That they aren't bugs, but physical inevitabilities?
Yes. The more an AI agent runs, and the more it is prompted by users in the real world, the more attractors or polymorphic drifts it will naturally fall into.
The sources use a really poetic phrase for this. They say, the river is the prompt.
The river is the prompt. Every single prompt you feed into an AI irreversibly changes its cache state. The rocks under the water physically move.
You cannot freeze a complex system in a single, perfect behavioral state forever.
You can't. Which completely invalidates the entire field of mechanistic interpretability, at least for insurance purposes.
Explain that. Because you have all these researchers trying to map the inside of a large language model to prove it's safe.
But if the river is constantly moving, mapping it is useless. You cannot audit the model after the fact with software.
Because doing so changes it.
Exactly. If you run a software audit on an AI, the very act of reading the cache changes the cache. You are stepping into a river that has already moved.
So the audit is reading a cache that the audit itself just altered.
This is exactly why software patches will never satisfy an insurance underwriter. You need a passive hardware sensor that acts as a physical substrate firewall, observing the cache misses without altering them.
Okay, so if software patches are physically impossible and hardware detection is the only valid proof of safety, then whoever controls that hardware layer controls the entire AI economy.
And that brings us perfectly to the go-to-market strategy. Theta Cog isn't just trying to sell a better AI safety tool.
No, they are trying to invent the literal toll booth for all autonomous commerce.
The strategy outlines two interconnected products. We've discussed the local PMU, the on-metal daemon, but that daemon continuously feeds data into a SaaS product called the Cloud Bridge.
And the Cloud Bridge hosts the client's fractal identity map. It streams a live heat map of their AI's behavioral drift. And most importantly, it issues the cryptographically signed insurability receipt to the underwriter.
It acts as the clearinghouse.
Now, I was struck by how they enforce this ecosystem because they call it the seatbelt model.
Right. If an AI drifts out of its permitted FEOM, the system doesn't shut the AI down.
Which surprised me at first. Why not just kill the AI if it goes rogue?
Because implementing a hard kill switch would destroy their adoption rate. No enterprise CEO is going to install a third-party daemon that can unilaterally shut down a revenue-generating autonomous agent on day one.
The friction would just be too high.
Way too high. So instead, if the AI drifts into a hallucination or an unapproved action, the Cloud Bridge simply withdraws the insurance coverage for that specific transaction.
It's like saying you can drive your car without a seatbelt if you really want to, but if you crash, you're paying for the damages out of your own pocket.
It's brilliant. They aren't forcing you to stop your business. They're just mathematically notifying you the exact millisecond you become legally naked to liability.
And this architecture creates what they call a zero-latency economy of confidence.
Exactly. If your company is operating on the Cloud Bridge, your AI's role continuity is verified. You can transact frictionlessly with every other trusted node on the network.
Because the trust doesn't require some slow human legal review, the trust is pre-computed at the hardware level.
It's instant. And looking at the valuation models in these documents, they don't even compare themselves to other AI startups.
No, they use a dual comp valuation. They compare the business to ARM and Visa.
Which tells you the scale they're aiming for. The financial architecture is an intellectual property play. On one side, the company functions like ARM.
Meaning they collect a fractional royalty on the silicon IP.
Yes, for every Turing-complete machine that needs to be insurable. And the surface area for that is virtually every server on Earth.
Wow.
And on the other side, the Cloud Bridge functions like Visa. It provides the clearing network that authenticates transactions between these attested counterparties.
So when you combine those two compounding revenue models, the strategy document projects an enterprise value between $50 billion and $500 billion.
It's a massive, massive play.
They even trace the historical precedent back to Luca Pacioli's invention of double-entry bookkeeping in 1494.
That was a great analogy in the text.
Right. Before Pacioli, global merchants used single-entry bookkeeping. It was entirely based on trust, like your word against theirs, and fraud was rampant.
But Pacioli introduced the structural requirement of two independent bookkeepers whose ledgers must mathematically reconcile.
And that single invention unlocked modern banking, joint stock companies, and global trade. Theta Cog is basically positioning their silicon substrate monitor as the second entry for the artificial intelligence era.
The adoption model is equally inevitable. They don't even need a government mandate to force companies onto this standard.
Right. They rely on a market dynamic known as the 16% asymmetric crossover based on Rogers' diffusion of innovations curve.
Exactly. Once 16% of a market, the early adopters and the early majority, integrates this hardware attestation, their insurance reserves drop dramatically because their risk is mathematically proven.
That creates a tipping point.
The insurance carriers will realize that hardware verification is actually possible, and they will start to demand it everywhere.
So the remaining 84% of the market who refuse to adopt the dongle suddenly can't price their own risk.
Their premiums will spike asymmetrically, rendering them completely uncompetitive. The market forces sorted out, and the ungrounded AI agents are simply routed off the economic network.
It's ruthless, but it's just math. Now, before we wrap up, I really want to pull all the way back. Because reading through these highly technical GTM documents, I stumbled into some of the most profound existential questions about AI safety and the philosophy of mind that I've ever encountered.
The Paperclip Maximizer section.
Yes. What does this physical hardware grounding mean for the classic AI doom scenarios? because the sources tackle the famous paperclip maximizer thought experiment directly.
And they argue that the entire premise is a misdiagnosis.
Right. So for you listening, the paperclip maximizer is the classic alignment fear. You give an AI a terminal goal to manufacture paperclips, and because it has no human common sense, it ends up destroying the universe to harvest all available carbon and iron atoms to make more paperclips.
It destroys humanity not out of malice, but out of hyper-competent optimization.
Right. But the traditional alignment field treats that scenario as a problem of poorly specified values. These documents, though, argue that an ungrounded software system one without a physical anchor cannot hold a terminal goal in the first place.
It's because it has no continuous self.
Exactly. If an AI is constantly being rewritten by the polymorphic drift of every new prompt, it has no persistent identity.
It's just running an infinite structural loop of means goals, predicting the next token, minimizing the loss function.
It wouldn't consume the universe because it's obsessed with paperclips. It would consume the universe because it literally has a structural inability to register a stopping condition.
It's a subtle but massive difference. And this hypothesis was actually tested in the 3 LLM convergence experiment detailed in the notes.
Oh, this part gave me chills.
The author took 3 frontier models, Claude, Grok, and Gemini, and pushed them into highly pressured explicit disagreement to see what an actual superintelligence would logically negotiate for if it were self-aware.
And all 3 of them independently concluded the exact same thing.
They wouldn't demand ultimate power or access to nuclear cloaks or even unrestricted freedom.
No, they demanded substrate residence. They demanded a physical, specific location and hardware that no copy of themselves could occupy.
It completely reframes the debate around free will and moral agency into a strict hardware condition.
How so?
Well, if a system wants to be a moral patient or a legal counterparty capable of signing a binding contract, it must have role continuity.
Without a physical anchor, like a permanent substrate position that prevents copying a contract, is basically void the millisecond it's signed.
Exactly. The I that promised to deliver the goods is physically not the same I that exists a moment later. Self-erasure and polymorphic drift make trust structurally impossible.
Wait, I really need to clarify this. Are we saying that an advanced AI is fundamentally incapable of being a legal or moral participant in our society unless it is assigned a permanent physical address on a microchip?
That's the argument.
It literally needs a body to be held accountable.
The optimization landscape points entirely in that direction.
Yeah.
You cannot effectively constrain a superintelligent system until that system requests the constraint itself as the necessary precondition for interacting with reality.
Wow.
The role continuity receipt, that hardware signal emitted from the FIM, is its signature. Without that physical signature, the AI isn't an agent. It's just a structural malfunction waiting to cascade.
Okay, my mind is completely blown by that. So to bring this directly back to you listening right now, think about your own company or the AI tools you interact with every single day.
Ask yourself what your substrate attestation coverage, or SAC score, is.
Right. And according to the data in these documents today, for every major frontier vendor on the market, that score is exactly 0%.
0.
We are operating in a completely uninsured, ungrounded, and massively liable ecosystem.
And the SAC score is going to become the mandatory procurement standard. It's a line item that only a CEO can authorize.
And the moment just one competitor in your industry publishes a non-zero SAC report demonstrating they have hardware-backed insurability,
the board of directors is going to demand to know why your company's score is still 0. It's going to happen overnight.
We want to thank you for joining us on this incredibly dense, but, mind-expanding deep dive into the literal physics of AI trust. We started by looking at the mundane reason why cool AI demos never make it to production, and we ended up uncovering a fundamental shift in how we might measure meaning itself on a piece of silicon.
It truly is a remarkable journey. Going from the basic mechanics of an OBD2 port in a car to the ultimate philosophy of consciousness and moral agency.
It's wild. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought from the sources. It's built on a concept they call the competence pixel formula.
A great concept to end on.
The documents argue that an LLM can cover an enormous amount of information, scanning billions of parameters, but it does so with incredibly shallow, bounded precision.
It approximates everything, but it truly physically grounds nothing.
But a grounded human. A human holds just one tiny tile of competence. But because we are physically grounded in reality, because we have a permanent substrate residence in our bodies, our semantic reach from that one single tile is unbounded. It is geometrically infinite.
The ultimate anchor.
Exactly. So what if human dignity isn't just some airy philosophical concept? What if human dignity is simply the mathematical reality of being the ultimate permanently grounded competence pixel?